I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which this podcast is recorded today, the Wiradjuri people, my people. I'd like to take this time to acknowledge our elders, past, those that watch over, guide and protect us, present, those that walk beside us, nurture and teach us the way, and future, the young ones that will succeed us into the future. I would like to acknowledge our continued connection to the lands, the waterways, and the skies, our animals, plants, and fauna. I would like to acknowledge our history. In story, song, and dance, we continue to share these stories. I would like to acknowledge each and every one of you. And I'd like to acknowledge the lands on which you tune into today, where you sit, where you live, where you work, and where you play, and how important it is for us to acknowledge where we are at this very moment. Mandangu, thank you.
Research tells us that getting quality financial advice can make a big difference in our life and especially in retirement. But it's a service that can sometimes seem out of reach for the ordinary person. And let's be honest, it's an industry that has not had the best reputation in Australia in recent years. The good news is there are a lot of great advisors out there, and especially amongst the emerging cohort of young women who are challenging the traditional stereotype of white wealthy men looking after the financial affairs of other white wealthy men. Trish Gregory is my guest today, and she is a certified financial planner with a long interest in good money decisions and a wealth of life experience prior to entering the industry as a financial advisor. When she isn't chasing chickens or children, beekeeping and growing veggies, Trish is having great conversations about budgeting, goal planning and trade-offs with her Millennial and Generation Z clients, as well as supporting women to enter and grow in the financial advice industry. In our conversation today, Trish and I explore the challenges of being a woman in the financial services industry, as well as why we need systemic change to make the advice space better for women, both as workers and as clients. Now, Trish, you work as a financial advisor and have done for several years. Could you explain for our listeners who maybe haven't had much to do with the advice industry what a financial advisor actually does?
Absolutely, I can. Thank you so much for having me, Jenny. I'm very excited to be here. What does a financial advisor do? Well, there's a lot that a financial advisor can do. It all depends on perhaps the niche that they're going into. So really broadly, financial advice from a legislative point of view is about financial product advice. And product means superannuation, insurance, investments, those sorts of things. And traditionally, financial advice was a sales role. It was selling either insurance or an investment product, whereas it's changed dramatically over the years, where now financial advice is how can we help you with your financial world to get from where you are to where you want to be. And for a lot of people, that's, well, help me retire. I want to be able to retire comfortably. But for myself, who works with Millennials and Gen Z, it's more along the lines of how do I buy a home? How do I plan for parental leave? How do I retire early? Those sorts of things. And in order to answer those questions for people, help them on their way to, say, financial freedom, there's all sorts of pieces of financial advice that are put in there. So things like budgeting and cash flow, superannuation, tax considerations, investments, insurance, estate planning. So it covers a really broad range, and depending on what each individual needs, financial advice sort of goes down those avenues.
Can you just explain very quickly the difference between financial advisors and financial counsellors, and when somebody might want to see a financial counsellor rather than a financial advisor?
So a financial counsellor really is helping people with debt problems. So they will help you negotiate to get out of debt or consolidate debt, to have a debt plan so that you can get out of that situation that you are in. Whereas financial advisors are looking forward into what can we build. And sometimes financial advisors will help you get out of debt. I know we have recently been helping negotiate some debt to be paid off quicker with the providers for some of our members. But typically, financial counsellors would be, you're just talking about sort of consumer debt type scenarios, whereas financial advice, you're really looking forward into how can I use my money in a way that's going to work for me in the future.
Now, you and I have known each other for a long time, and I know you haven't always been a financial advisor. So what was it that attracted you to the industry, and what was your journey to getting to where you are today?
Oh, well, it was quite a journey. So I've always been interested in money and finance and investments and budgeting and those sorts of things. So I had a dad who was really, really financially savvy, bit of a tight ass, but definitely knew his way around money. And I had a mum who worked really well with not a lot of funds available, but just didn't have the financial she definitely took the more traditional role of the mum in the household back in the day. And the journey from when I was a kid, my parents split up, and I saw the really stark difference between what happened with my mum and what happened with my dad, and how they had to manage their lives financially. I'm one of four. There was definitely struggle town from my mum's point of view. She'd been a stay-at-home parent for many, many years. And that actually started for me back when I was about 13 years old, this little idea in my head of, I don't ever want to be reliant on anyone else, and I want to make sure that I'm okay no matter what. So I did a TAFE course, which was like how to invest. I'd budgeted from my very first job. I'd never gone into debt, although it was harder those days than it is nowadays. At age 23, I bought my very own apartment all by myself. Very tiny apartment, but I was determined I needed to buy property. Pretty much all I could buy. And then I met my partner. He was in the military. So I followed him around Australia, rented out my apartment, ended up selling my apartment because we were on a single income and it was a challenge. And then 2016, he was medically discharged from the military, so he was injured. At that time, I'd been a stay-at-home parent for 4.5 years, and we both agreed, well, it's time to swap roles. He needs to be the stay-at-home parent. I need to be the working parent, the employed parent, rather. I decided I didn't know what I wanted to do. I'd worked at universities. I'd worked broadly in like admin-y type roles, but I had 2 small children, and I really didn't want to leave them just to do a job. So my partner, he said, why don't you go and do something with money? Because you always talk about money and I don't really want to hear it. Can you go talk to other people about it? Great. So I did a little diploma and an advanced diploma, and then sort of fell into my first role with a single planner practice. Very quickly became a financial advisor. Had not really much education beyond the diploma and the advanced diploma, which took me sort of 2 to 3 months each. And from there, I bounced around in a few different financial advice roles until I managed to find the employer that really felt true to my values and the way I want to give financial advice and the way I live my life.
And what are those values?
Very
What
good
is it that you love about the way that you work in the advice space now?
The way that I work in the advice space now is very female-centered, where most financial advice is stereotypically it's a 56-year-old man that is getting advice, whereas the firm that I work at now, we are predominantly women, and then also predominantly gay and lesbians, gay men and lesbians. So very different to the typical financial advice. We work predominantly with index investing. We don't take commissions on superannuation or investments. We charge flat fees, so there's nothing hidden there. In addition to that, we're a certified B Corp organization, which means we care about people and the planet, as well as also making a profit so that the company can, stay open and continue to help people. So the sustainability type things, the ESG investing, supporting women, constantly changing the status quo so that we can help more people who are quite underserved in the financial advice industry get access to advice that works for them.
It's interesting that you talk about the typical financial planning client being a 56-year-old male, because that seems to be quite similar to the demographics of the average financial advisor. And being a woman in the space, you are absolutely in the mind. What are some of the challenges for you as a woman working in this industry?
Yeah, you're not wrong. I make up less than a quarter of female. So there's about a quarter of financial advisors are female. Less than that are anyone who's not white or diverse in any sort of a way. So I have certainly had some challenges. I've been underpaid in more than one role by at least 10. However, the joys of being a female financial advisor is that there are more and more female financial advisors coming along and being in the profession and doing things their way and making a difference for the average everyday Australian, which I feel so fortunate to be surrounded by an incredible cohort of women and very supportive men who are challenging the status quo, who are making sure that advice is much more accessible than it ever used to be, including, free, including podcasts, blogs, YouTube channels, TikToks, all those sorts of things. Like there's so much accessible free advice from qualified financial advisors, which is really exciting because there's still quite a disconnect between free advice on social media and full personalised financial advice. And because of the legislation that financial advisors, some might say, are buried under, maybe not that dramatic, but there is a lot of red tape, compliance and legislation for financial advisors, which means that there's an opportunity for some unscrupulous people to take advantage of people within Australia. They give them information that perhaps is not correct or that is actually selling them on crypto or some scheme or some membership. Whereas now I see a lot of women as well as a lot of men getting into the social media space and providing really good information for people so that they actually get further educated, stay away from the scams, improve their financial education, all before they might need to seek advice.
I think you raise a really important point around the regulation in the industry. Financial advice is incredibly highly regulated, and we've just seen continual changes in that regulation, certainly from when I first entered the industry in 1999. We've just had act after act after act passed with the goal of improving professionalism, of improving ethics. And yet a lot of people don't understand in everyday life that definition of financial advice, the rules around what can and can't be said, things that are financial products like superannuation and investments, and yet somebody can be talking about cryptocurrencies and property that aren't covered by the law, and talk about them as investments and are covered by the same regulation that you are as a financial advisor. And that's that line between factual information, that general advice, and that personal advice space. Do you think we need more education in the industry around what those things actually mean for people?
I think the challenge is the information's out there, like everything. The information is out there. It's getting the information consumable in a way that people understand. So I see a lot of time on, say, Facebook forums where someone will ask a question and a heap of people will give responses. And oftentimes, like, I might know the answer, but legally I'm not allowed to tell you unless it's personalised financial advice in a statement of advice. But everyday people are totally allowed to just write information, whether it's right or wrong, whether they've taken into account the person's personal circumstances. I certainly feel like it would be really, really helpful if more people understood what financial advice is and the layers that you have to go through to be able to provide financial advice, because it is expensive. Like, financial advice is not cheap. Pretty much all financial advisors, at least everyone that I meet, would love for financial advice to be more accessible, much easier for people to understand and use and take by the hands and run with. But the reality is the legislation, like you said, it builds on top of each other with the goal of making financial advice safer. But the reality is it just makes it more expensive because the people that are following the rules still need to follow the rules, and rules are this long. The people that don't follow the rules are never going to follow the rules anyway. So all the information's out there. It's just about how do we make it accessible so that everyone can understand what they might need. Are they the type of people like one of my siblings who can consume the information, take it, run with it, be really, really clear on what they're looking for because they understand the legislation and they understand the implications? Or are they someone like another one of my siblings who just needs someone to hold their hand and educate them and walk them very, very slowly through every single thing to make sure that they're not going to screw up their financial future and their retirement? So there's lots of different people in the world and they all need something a little bit different. And I would love to see financial advice be cheaper.
We know that research tells us that when people get professional advice, it improves their outcomes in the long run. And it's not just about retirement, it's actually all of the decisions along the way. Having the right insurances that give people peace of mind, having the right investments, all of those things that come together, and getting professional advice can really, really help with that. And yet it is so expensive. I think one of the other things is the quality of advice that's provided, and particularly for women who are clients.
Mm-hmm.
How do we make the advice industry and the experience of getting advice better for women? Because let's be honest, in an industry that's been dominated by men, not just in terms of providing advice, but also developing policy and developing products and coming up with strategies, how do we make the industry better in terms of the experience and the advice that's provided by women? Because there has been that gender bias.
So I would love to see, there are a million things I'd love to see to improve the quality of advice for women. Number one, I think it's happened. The tax deductibility of advice, that's great. Should always be, have been a thing. For the changes that I'd like to see is less red tape. Last year and the year before, there were scholarships out there for women by Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, which supported women to get education, to become financial advisors. And that allowed more women to progress in their careers, which then allowed more women, or supported rather, that supported more women to become financial advisors, which then increases that diversity of women, which increases that diversity within financial advice. Some of the changes that I would like to see improved, like when we think about policy, one of the biggest challenges are that whole, if you haven't experienced it, and you don't know about it, why would you bring it to the table? Nothing needs to change from your situation. If you're a man in his 50s, you might know nothing about, you might have either not had children or completely forgotten about the exhaustion of having children and forgotten how hard it is to have small children, then therefore not really having a choice to work or not work because childcare is expensive. Those sorts of things really hamper women's ability to work, as well as caring for the older generation. So some things I'd like to see on a broad scale to help women's economic empowerment is things like free childcare. That'd be amazing. I'd love to see more women in politics, because the more lived experience people have, the more people can bring things up and make changes. And I want to give you a really practical example. So recently, my boss at Fox and Hare, he put it out there on LinkedIn asking a question about menstrual leave and leave for miscarriage. He's a gay man in his 30s, obviously never had to think about this sort of thing before. And he acknowledged it. He said, I have no idea about this. And actually, you commented on his LinkedIn post and you said, what about perimenopausal and menopausal women? And he said, you know what? I didn't even know that was a thing. I had literally no idea what perimenopause was, never heard it before in my life. Fair. He's a gay man in his 30s. How would that be in his radar? Unless maybe he's seen his mum go through it, but his mum and my mum, like at their generations, not a lot talked about it, whereas now, much more open. And so now that's on his radar. And the idea is that if people have never experienced something, they need to have people who have experienced things in their circle so that then they know to change something. And if we don't have enough representation of women and diverse folk, whether that's neurotypical, whether that's First Nations, whether that's people in the LGBTQ plus community, people who've come from disadvantaged backgrounds, we're not really going to get the changes that we need to improve the world more generally. But when we think about the quality of advice, like you say, advice was built by men for men. And we need a huge shift to be able to make sure that advice can actually be built by everyone for everyone. And there's been some policy changes, but I think we have a huge way to go. One of the key things with that is when people don't have the lived experience, they might look at it at statistics, say, within, women, how many women are working? And they look at the statistics and they say, how do we help more women to work? What they're completely missing is just telling a woman to work more or do overtime or contribute more to super or to start investing. Completely misses the point around the challenges women face today, whether they have children or they have elderly parents or they have caring responsibilities in some other way, if they have burnout and all of the hurdles that women have to face that men don't, like perimenopause or just living within our cycle, as well as every extra hurdle that we have to jump across as women on a day-to-day basis that can really just leach our life force out of us sometimes. So just saying something is very different to actually helping women achieve the thing that we're trying to do, because we know that more women that participate in the workforce, the better the Australian economy is.
I think you mentioned 25% of the workforce currently of financial advisors are women, and there are several barriers for women entering and women staying in the industry. Tell me about your campaign to improve access to childcare at conferences and how that's not just relevant for financial advice and in the financial services industry, but more broadly as well.
Yeah, I think in female-dominated professions, there's less of a problem here. But in a male-dominated profession, absolutely, it's a huge issue that a woman or a person who is able to bear children really has an issue with parental leave as well as childcare, the caring responsibilities. So when I had my third child, I was a fairly new financial advisor. I think I was 2 years into financial advice, and I had baby number 3. I realized that the conferences that were out there had no childcare option, had no information around childcare in them. So there was the expectation that you don't come with your child. There was, it's kind of unwritten. If you don't say it explicitly, then it's kind of clear that you're not including people. So in 2019, I went to an international conference called FinCon in America, and they had free childcare, which meant that I took 9.5-month-old Felix all the way over to America. And he and I did the conference. He went into childcare. It was really hard, but my God, I learned a lot. And I was so grateful that they had free childcare, right? Like a sponsor had their name up. They had like a conference room, or they had 2 conference rooms. It was sort of limited childcare, like you had to bring your own food and all that sort of stuff. But it was childcare. And then to come back and realize that there was no childcare at the biggest conference in Australia for financial advisors was disappointing, because we seem to expect women to come back to work, to employment, before 12 months. I was certainly asked that with Felix. Oh, why are you taking 12 months off? What are your clients going to think? I was like, what is my child going to think, guys? I need to be with my child more than I need to be with my clients. But somehow we don't include women when they're at these really early stages of having babies. So they kind of are supposed to sit at home. So I really, really want to, and I'll continue to campaign on this, to get childcare at the FAAA Congress and have a sponsor pay for it, so that women that are having babies, whether they are in support roles or whether they are in advice roles or whether they're in BDM roles, they can continue to do their job and go to conferences and connect with people and do this important learning, because this is one of those micro things that push women further and further behind, right? Like every time nowadays, when women choose to work from home, whereas it's more likely that the men will go back into the office, which means they get more face time, which means they're probably going to get promoted more. Every time that happens, that's a tiny little thing that stops a woman. And when you have a baby, obviously there's at least a period of time when you're not working. There's also a period of time I experienced where no one was signing on as a client because I was pretty heavily pregnant. I think everyone thought, oh, I'm not going to sign with her because she's about to bugger off, which was fair. I took 14 months off. But then that affected my ability to earn bonuses because I wasn't signing anyone because I was really pregnant. But like, how do you navigate that when you know someone's going to take time off? So I would love to see some things like childcare facilities at all conferences. I actually went to one when Felix was 3.5 months old, and I messaged the person who was running the conference. And it was the first year that conference had been run. And I said, hey, I want to bring Felix. He's going to be 3. I was still pregnant then. I want to bring Felix. And the person said, I don't know, there's no childcare facilities. It was my third child. I said, that's fine. I'm going to bring him because I'm the third time parent. I don't need childcare facility. I don't need, a bathroom. Like, I can do everything on a bus, for crying out loud. Like, I can manage. And so I brought him, and it was great. Everyone loved him. Most people didn't notice him because it was my third child and I knew what to do, and it's pretty chill. And I just want it to be normal, because there are childcare people that are set up to go to these conference facilities. It's normal. Other industries do it every day.
I'm sure that there would be people that would push back on the idea of childcare, saying, well, that's again a personal issue that you need to address, that you should be dealing with. Why should it be a bigger issue, without realizing that, well, firstly, often if someone is partnered with children and they're male, they go off to conferences without a second thought about who's going to be looking after the kid because of the default position. But also it is an industry issue, because if you have barriers that prevent women from entering an industry, but then also staying within the industry, that's problematic. And that means the industry is not as good as it should be. I find it fascinating that financial services, and you alluded to this earlier when you talked about some of the roles that you have, financial services has one of the biggest gender pay gaps in Australia.
Yep.
And I find that fascinating, because often you'll hear people say, well, women just need to know more about money and ask for a higher rate. And if they knew more, then we wouldn't have this gender pay gap. And I think, wow, we have women working in financial services who absolutely know their stuff. It's not a lack of knowledge. It's not even a lack of confidence, because we know women will ask and negotiate and seek raises, but there is still this persistent, huge gender pay gap in the industry.
It is a really big issue. And in my master's, I did an assignment on this, where women ask just as much as men for the pay rises and those sorts of things, but they get knocked back more. So women absolutely ask. It's just that an employer or a manager's unconscious bias, it means they just don't see that it's equal work, or that the woman's actually doing more work, or actually the woman has higher hurdles and it's still equal work or better work, or, slightly under work. Whatever it is, all of us have unconscious biases. And if you think you don't, check yourself. You absolutely do. And you're just not aware of them, which is a bigger problem. I checked myself earlier when I said work as opposed to unpaid work. Like, I'm constantly checking myself, because I know that I keep saying it because it's such an ingrained thing to say. When we think about the unconscious bias that really sits within financial advice, it's huge. Like, most financial advice firms have pretty woeful parental leave policies. I would argue the large majority have no superannuation guarantee whilst on unpaid parental leave as a standard. So when we think about all these sorts of things, and you're right, like, financial advisors now, all educated, all of them have at least a degree, a bunch of them have a master's, and yet this gender pay gap exists, and it's worse. I think it's it's the worst or one of the worst pay gaps in all professions. I believe it's around 25.
Can I ask you about the impact of unconscious bias on the advice that's provided to women as clients?
Sure. When we think about financial advice and typical financial advice, the way it would look is there's a guy who comes in, he might bring his wife, and he will get advice around his superannuation and his investments and his insurance. And there might be something for the wife, but it sort of tends to be secondary. And oftentimes the wife doesn't actually get the insurance because she's a stay-at-home parent, or she's the lower income owner and they'd be fine without her income, those sorts of things. And oftentimes, I've experienced this a few times when I was working with retirees and pre-retirees. I would have a widow come in and say, my husband and I had a financial advisor. He's now passed. I wanted to find a woman. I never understood what that financial advisor was saying. I don't think my husband did either, but he didn't want to show that he didn't understand. And that woman we'd then have to set everything up generally from scratch, because it was usually advice that's no longer appropriate for, just her. If a financial advisor doesn't know how to draw out what's actually going on, they can take what someone said at face value and then put someone in something completely inappropriate rather than understanding the why behind the what. And it's important to understand that you have your own biases about yourself and other people have their own biases about you and what you say and what you think as well. And I have had some clients and members in the past that have said, do whatever you want, Trish. I trust you implicitly, whatever you say. And I always, as lovely as that is, I always push back and say, no. You've got to learn too. You can't just hand all this over, because that's not going to get you where you want to be. You need to understand what's going on as well. 'Cause I don't want you to need me forever.
I think even some of the assumptions that we bring around social norms and expectations and the impact that has, and I think particularly for young women getting advice, because young women, are forging their own paths and are great at, I think, embracing the idea of financial independence and financial security, and are really empowered. And I'll acknowledge the work of some amazing educators out in that space. And that's very exciting. But often there is, for example, an assumption, that woman, she'll get married and she'll have kids and she'll take time out of the workforce. And even those assumptions, I think we need to really completely reinvent those, unpack those, so that, advisors are looking at the person in front of them, leaving aside any expectations they may bring. Even in those initial interviews, let's say you've got a couple that comes in young, recently partnered or married, conversations about potential plans, not assuming that they necessarily want to have children, but also just not assuming that it's the female that's going to be taking time off to care for those children. Having the open, really rethinking the way we even approach the questions to say, have you thought about your plans for the future? Have you thought about how you're going to share the unpaid work? Framing it that way rather than unconsciously bringing those questions into play, because it impacts the investment advice that's given. As you mentioned, it impacts the insurance advice. The number of women that I have come across who are significantly underinsured, because nobody thinks about the value if they are a stay-at-home full-time carer, or that's their primary, they are the primary carer. The value of that work, of childcare, of food preparation, of domestic cleaning, all of that, the economic value of work. What happens if that person is ill for a significant period of time or experiences a permanent disability? We need to make sure that women are insured. And women in the paid workforce exploring income protection, because still the vast majority of women in the paid workforce do not have income protection insurance. And going beyond that, making sure that the insurance policies that they do have are appropriate for this situation. And the number of insurance policies I've seen, if we're talking about total and permanent disability, for example, or total or trauma cover, that ceases cover or pauses cover or drops the level of cover if that person is not in paid employment. Again, that comes down to product design. And I think it's fundamentally flawed. And we need to be having those conversations about those things too, right?
Desperately do. That's right. So, design of product is always a work in progress. Another one is mental health, which I think, especially post 2020, everyone feels like everyone suffers with or tries to manage as best they can. Where from an insurance perspective, mental health is just a big, gigantic block. If you've ever told anyone you're a bit sad, you can't have mental illness included in your coverage. And there's nothing that passes it out to, well, you've been medicated for 10 years, you've never had an issue and you're completely stable, to you got dumped and then your dog died and then, your house got flooded and you had like an episode. Like there's no nuance yet within the insurance industry, which is a big challenge for the industry, but also a really amazing opportunity for them to grow and support more people. Because I often will find my members say to me, but that's not an issue. My doctor isn't concerned. I've never taken a day off work, or I'm medicated. Like, what is the issue here? And I sort of have to explain to them kind of how far behind the insurance profession is for properly assessing risk.
And it is interesting when we start talking about gender equality issues. In fact, there are equality issues, full stop. On that thing of product development, one of the things we don't have at the moment is really products that appropriately address longevity risk in retirement. We know that women live longer in retirement. They're more likely to outlive their money. We have yet to see really great products being designed in more recent years that really address those longevity risks. And I think it's a particular issue for women.
Yeah. There has been... Now, I work with Millennials and Gen Z now, so I don't look at the retirement stuff because my oldest member is like 50. So although I know how to get people to retirement, and I've certainly worked with people in retirement, it's not the thing that I'm most focused on from a policy perspective lately. But there was a retirement standard that came in where the government said to the super funds, hey, you need to figure out a better way than just superannuation to pension. And, bringing in what we've talked about, it's not that simple to put it on the product if policy and the way that we help women and diverse people go through their working careers and their life and their unpaid moments. You can't, although yes, the product should absolutely be doing as much as it possibly can. This is not something that someone goes, oh, it's easy, we just need to write this one policy and we solve that problem. But it's a problem that needs to be solved. We can't only have product solving it, because they never will. The government can say, you guys aren't doing enough. But if we don't have policy way back here to help women with things like making sure the gender pay gap is eliminated, and we're not waiting another 100 years for that to happen, making sure that when women go on parental leave, they are completely financially supported to be able to raise our next cohort of taxpayers. If we don't have policy that supports people through life's nuances, they're always going to be disadvantaged at the end. It's just going to be the way it is.
And that's why we need to have the conversations about the issues, about policy responses, about industry responses, about community and individuals' responses, because it's not just about the individual. It's not just about the product developers. It's not just about policy. It's actually that interaction of how they come together that's so important. How important is it, if you want to get advice, to find the right advisor for you? And how do you go about doing that?
People might think that financial advice is just, you go, they give you the advice and off you go. But the reality is that financial advice is a relationship. So you really need to not trust the financial advisor and therefore turn off your brain and not think, but there does need to be a level of connection and a level of trust with your financial advisor, because frankly, we know everything about people. So, and we need to provide someone with really good advice. So as an example, I need to know about people's money history, about how they grew up, what their parents were like with money, what sort of money drama might be sitting. I need to understand about people's kids and grandkids and their pets and all of their situation, in order to be able to provide them with advice that is so specific to them, because that's what they're paying for and that's what I legally have to provide. There are other forms of financial advice where someone might say, hey, I'm hitting retirement age, I'm about to retire, I just need you to help me to roll my superannuation into a pension. So it goes from 15% tax to 0% tax and turn on my income stream. And then I don't need you anymore because it's fine. So there is definitely much more transactional financial advice. These days, I mostly see people where it is a relationship financial advice, and financial advice is ongoing, which is to say that you meet at least once a year with your financial advisor. The way I explained it to some brand new members recently was, we do this big piece of advice where we make any changes at the very beginning, and then we send you on your path and we kind of keep tapping you with guardrails. So we keep making small changes along the way unless something big happens, where we can then keep you in the direction that you want to go towards, because it's so easy to start going off on a tangent and then not realize for years and years later, because financial changes aren't necessarily instant. It can take 5, 7, 10, 20 years to really see that impact. And I'm sure, Jenny, you might feel the same way as me. Like when you very first start investing or you very first have that superannuation account, you're like, wow, there's almost nothing in it. So great. But then 10 or 20 years down the track, you look back and you go, that $1,000 or $100 or whatever it was is now this much larger sum that I'm feeling pretty good about, and will actually continue to snowball and grow and get bigger and bigger. When we think about financial advice and what sort of a financial advisor you should go and look for, you do need to find someone that sort of lives to your values as well. So if you say, I just want to make the most amount of money and I don't really care how I do it and I'll pay you a bunch, just make me heaps money, well, you might have one type of advisor. If you say, well, I want to make sure that I'm financially independent by age 40, that's going to be a very different financial advisor that's going to help you. If you're say someone like me who really loves gardening and has chickens and has bees and really wants to make sure that the planet is okay and that we give our children a planet that's not completely destroyed, you might want to make sure that your money goes to investments that are going to do good. And that will be a particular type of advisor that really focuses on that. So there's a number of ways people can look for a certain type of advisor. You can search for advisors within your location, or you can search for them within a certain, whether they are advisors that talk about being ethical, or whether they're advisors like myself that work with millennials or Gen Z. You can generally, I know there's only about 15,000 of us now, but you can find an advisor that sort of fits what you're looking for.
I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you the women who have inspired you and why.
Definitely my mother. She has had quite a lot of hardships. And also actually my former boss, Jess Brady. So Jess Brady co-founded Fox and Hare with Glenn, my other boss, my current boss. And then Jess is one of these staunch feminists aiming to help people who are underserved get more financial education to improve their lives. And the things I learned from her from the year that I worked with her have been extraordinary, and the way she works and really just has this focus of helping people is so inspirational.
If you were Prime Minister for a day, what would be your number one objective with regards to gender equality and building women's financial security?
If I only had one?
Only one, sorry. One.
Free childcare.
Yep.
That is huge. It takes away that, well, you're the female or the lower income earner, so you're going to stay at home and not earn an income, whilst I, the male, the higher income earner, are going to continue my career, because economically it makes sense, because childcare just takes so much of the budget from a family. And if we were to avoid that, if we were to get rid of that, then people can choose to stay at home with their child because they want to, rather than or they can choose to go and be employed if they want to. There's not that big barrier in the middle for them. I would love to see that. It happened briefly in 2020. I wish it would have just continued. But also that childcarers actually get paid enough to provide a really good service, an incredibly important service to everyone in the world.
We have not talked about this much because we've tended to look at broader issues around financial advice and the advice industry and gender biases and so on. But what are 3 simple steps, actions that individuals can put in place today to help improve their financial position now and into the long term?
It's a great question. And my answers aren't going to be revolutionary, which might make some people groan. Like, you want sort of the silver bullet or the tip that no one's ever told you before. But the reality is that getting to financial security doesn't feel like it in the beginning. It feels like a drudgery. It feels like tiny, tiny steps of why would I bother? But change happens with compound interest. It is the 8th wonder of the world. Compound interest is a beautiful thing where your money makes money on your money. So 3 simple things people can do. Number 1 is understand what's going in and understand what's going out. And now working with Millennials and Gen Z, that is the cornerstone of any piece of financial advice that I provide to people, is really clearly understanding what their expenses are and what their income is, and either where's the gap. So if they don't match and they don't have enough income, well, then what needs to change so that you can either get to 0 or you can start to save some money. Or if there is surplus, or there should be surplus perhaps sometimes, whisking that money away before your grubby little hands get on it and putting it into something for your future, whether that's building up an emergency fund to start with and then putting it either into superannuation or putting it into an investment vehicle, whether that's for a short or long period of time, depending on your goals. That's the first thing, is cash flow. Cash flow is king, and it's so boring. You can call it a budget, you can call it a cash flow plan, you can call it your spending diaries. Like, I don't care what you call it. Just if you get a handle on your money, it will pay dividends in the future. The second thing is have a look at your superannuation statement. Now, we sort of talked about superannuation throughout this entire conversation, and if you are young, you're probably rolling your eyes going, I don't need to think about it, I'm young. But again, it's compound interest. By understanding the fees you pay, the performance of the fund, and the asset allocation or the risk of what you're invested in, and making sure that you're taking enough risk for your age, your fees are appropriate, you can make a huge difference in your later years. And almost all of us will get to our later years, which means you're going to need the money at some point. So you may as well do things in your teens and your 20s and your 30s and your 40s so that the later years are much more comfortable. The third thing people can do is, if you are in a couple and you have kids or you're thinking about having kids, you both need to be on the same page in terms of the time off and the superannuation contributions, as well as the expenses for having the baby or babies and all of that. That is a household expense. That is not the person with the uterus who is going to give birth. That's not a you expense, unless you're doing it solo. Obviously, it's all on you then. But if you're in a couple, that's both of you. And I have conversations all the time with women who say, well, I'm saving up to go on parental leave. And I say, but what's your partner doing? Because you're going on parental leave with their child. Why aren't they saving up an equal amount? You really have to, and it's a huge change in perception and in your psyche, but it's a really, really, really important one, because the challenges that I see is if the relationship doesn't work out, is one thing that could happen. You then have taken time off employment. You then have, it's cost you financially. And then if your partner leaves, then you are also likely to be behind your trajectory with the workplace. And so you just keep adding these huge hurdles to you because you both chose to have a baby. So ideally, make sure that your partner is preventing those hurdles from being in place in the first place, so that whether you spend the rest of your lives together or whether something happens that means you're no longer together, there's no financial burden that rests solely on you. It was split equally, or perhaps your partner paid for all of it because frankly it was your body, and it's hard being pregnant and having a baby.
They are all really great tips. And I know you've already mentioned Money Smart and a few other resources. Do you have any other go-to resources that you would recommend to women wanting to know more?
There are so many podcasts and blogs and TikToks and YouTubes from financial advisors or financial coaches. So before I give you another resource, I would say make sure that if you're getting information from somewhere, understand what's the benefit to the person who is giving you that information. So, for example, for a financial advisor, they're putting a heap of information out there because they want to help. But then also some of the people that read that information will then go to them to get financial advice. So, but we also all really love to help. If someone's telling you, well, I can help you get rich quick, or I can help you get rich slow, you just need to buy this or invest in this specific thing. They might be getting some kickback. They might be selling your data, like who knows. So just be really careful with some of your resources. So yes, Money Smart is a great one. The another one, if we're talking specifically about superannuation, Association of Superannuation Funds Australia, it's superannuation.asn.au. That tells you how much you might need in retirement. And it also has a handy dandy little calculator, which interestingly gives you different numbers to the Money Smart calculator. Those resources can be really handy to give you an idea of, am I on track? Actually, if I'm 30 or 40, do I need to put a concerted effort into my superannuation now so that I'll be okay when I'm older? Because when you're older, you have less chance to be able to pivot. Other resources are books like Lacey Philippich's Money School. There are a number of financial advisors on your favorite platform as well that like James Wrigley is really awesome, and he gives really practical bite-sized information. There's Finito with an F. That is a really good resource for helping you go down the garden path of I want to understand more about budgeting, or it asks you a number of questions and sort of gives you it's sort of a curated list of financial advisors providing information rather than having to go through their own, the financial advisors YouTube or TikTok or whatever. It sort of helps you curate what you're looking for specifically. So those are a couple.
I would just say thank you so much, Trish, for joining us on It's Not About the Money and for sharing your thoughts and insights. It's been a really great conversation and hopefully given the listeners lots to think about and lots to put into place and lots to find out as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, Jenny. It's been wonderful as always to chat with you.